Morning everyone, and welcome to my first meeting as the Mayor of South Yorkshire. I hope everybody enjoyed the long bank holiday weekend. We're going to go through the agenda, so can we just start please by asking for any apologies?
No apologies.
No apologies, thank you very much. Okay, on to agenda item number 2. There are no formal announcements, but I did just want to say a couple of things before we started proceedings. Firstly, this is the last South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority meeting with Dave Smith as our Chief Exec. I haven't been lucky enough to work with Dave for as long as I would have liked, but in the short time I have been here, I can see why he is held in such high regard by the people who have worked most closely with him. In his time here, he's established the SYMCA, and I know that any success we may have from here on will in no small part be down to the work that Dave has done. On behalf of this organisation and behalf of the people of South Yorkshire, thank you. Secondly, at the start of my term, I wanted to say that I'm humbled to have been elected last month. It's both an honour and a privilege to be here in this role. I can't promise to get everything right over the next 4 years, but I can and do promise to do everything within my power to make South Yorkshire healthier, wealthier, happier and more confident. I know the scale of the challenge in front of us, but as I said repeatedly during the election campaign, none of those challenges are either inevitable or insurmountable. I look forward to working every day in partnership with colleagues around this table to make sure our communities have the support and the opportunities they so richly deserve. I think that's it for item number 2, so can we please move on to item number 3, which is any urgent items? I don't think there are any, is that right?
No,
In which case, on to item number 4, items to be considered in the absence of public and press. I don't believe there are any of those either. No. So moving swiftly on to item number 5, voting rights for non-constituent members. Steve Davenport, please could you advise?
there are no non-constituent members present today anyway, and by convention they don't have voting rights on matters on the agenda unless by exception we allow it, so it's not an issue for today.
Great, thank you. On to item number 6, any declarations of interest by members in relation to any item of business on the agenda, please.
Programme approvals relating to maps.
Thank you. Okay.
There's a report by name on it, so I will leave rule for that item. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Declare an interest.
Thank you very much. Item number 7, please. Reports from and questions by members. None received in advance of the meeting, is that right? No? Everyone happy? Okay. In which case, on to item number 8. Receipt of petitions, please. Have there been any petitions from members of the public? No? Okay, great. Is all this swift? Let's have a look at it. Okay, on to item number 9, please. Public questions. We have received 5 questions from members of the public, all of whom I believe are present at the meeting. Is that right? Could I please ask Mr. Gordon Henshaw to read his question?
Right, I'm Gordon Henshaw from South Yorkshire, free from fossils. Kate Stott is also a member here as well. We're asking the Mayor to get involved with South Yorkshire Pensions Authority because we're very disappointed that despite a climate emergency being declared several years ago now, South Yorkshire Pensions Authority still has over £200 million of our money invested in fossil fuels. That includes Shell Oil, which again has carried on in its own sweet way and has no intention of developing a zero carbon future. Furthermore, out of this £10.5 billion that is invested, we've looked at what it's invested in. I mean, it's invested in shares, it's in commercial loans, it's actually bought property, and we've looked at the information, and we reckon that less than 1% of that money is actually invested in South Yorkshire and South Yorkshire businesses, which we think, considering it's workers' money that's been going in over the years from South Yorkshire, it's a poor state of affairs. I mean, we've actually got ownership of Sainsbury's in Belper. They've bought a car park in Bournemouth. You know, it's things like that that when we're short of money in South Yorkshire, we should be spending it here. And also, when you look at the green industries that's beginning to get established in South Yorkshire, we've got companies like Magtech who've been doing electric conversions on engines in Rotherham. We've got the ITM Green Hydrogen Project. We've got the Ultimate Battery Company. We've got Libertine. There's a lot of green energy companies in South Yorkshire that are viable enterprises that I'm sure are all looking for capital to invest and expand. And there's plenty more in the next 2-3 years, I'm sure, coming up. I mean, the Mayor has said he would like to see more investment in transport and green energy. And we think there's a big potential to redirect some of this 10.5 billion into those sort of industries. We've been campaigning, obviously, with members of that board. Our councillor reps are on that board, and even across the political spectrum, I think there has been general support to move in the direction of spending more of this money, investing more of this money in South Yorkshire. I mean, obviously, as a pension fund, it's got to go through fiduciary controls. It's got to make sure it's not investing in lame ducks. But I'm sure between Oliver and the rest of the combined authority members, there are plenty of investments that could be linked up. I mean, obviously, the pension fund will invest only in things that are going to make a profit. It won't just go and buy 500 buses. But obviously, there's scope to actually look at those sort of methods of channeling funds and making the most of that. So that's why we're, in terms of like other funding streams, bringing in, so you can actually bring things together and get some investment in South Yorkshire. So that's our question really, is please will the Mayor get involved with this board, and I hope in the next, even in the next 6 months to a year, we could actually make a big difference and get some of this 10.5 billion redirected, and certainly away from oil companies. We shouldn't be in this day and age investing our money in oil companies that are destroying the planet. Thanks.
Thank you, Gordon. And I think it's a great question, actually. And I think that the thrust, the intention of that question is just right. I couldn't agree more with the sentiment. Our own pension funds should be investing in South Yorkshire, and we've already had initial conversations here in this building and with my team, and I will continue to build on those with a number of pension funds and institutional investors in the coming weeks and months. And I'd be more than happy to update you and the public on that as those conversations carry on. But thank you very much for the question. Thank you. Second question, please, is from Mr. George Arthur.
Oh, wrong button. Great start. Right, I'm here from the South Yorkshire Freedom Riders, and we're asking for the Mayor to consider returning the extra travel concessions that South Yorkshire brought in when the travel concessions were first introduced. When the Labour government brought in the travel concessions for the elderly and disabled, one of the major reasons for doing that was to recognise that if people were getting out and about, moving, it was going to be not just good for those individuals, but actually taking pressure off of the health and social services, that people weren't going to be deteriorating watching the paint dry on their indoor walls. And South Yorkshire was one of a number of regions which took up the opportunity of adding extra concessions when that was brought in. And that included a 9 AM start to the using the travel pass and free train travel in South and West Yorkshire. And that gave people a wide number of places to encourage them to get out and to go and visit. There were also a large number of elderly people who did voluntary work in various parts around South and West Yorkshire. And one of the key reasons for, I think, the decision to have the transport free on trains was that when you reach a certain age, having transport which has toilet on board becomes quite an advantage. And also, you might notice that trains tend to be quite a lot warmer than buses, which is something, given the crisis that we're entering into at the moment, a whole number of our community faced with sort of the question about how they're going to heat their houses, the idea of being able to travel around warm when you're travelling being quite an important thing. Now, those extra concessions were removed in April 2014, and when that was done, there was no meaningful consultation, there was no proper advertising of the proposed changes, and that's something that we've faced quite a lot with the SYPT and then the MCA, a failure to consult very effectively. And we think that sort of proper consultation about things, I understand that there have been a few individuals going around the interchanges picking on people and asking what they think about having a gold card, which doesn't seem to me to be a proper idea of consultation. When those concessions were removed in April 2014, the saving from the not travelling free on trains was £329,000, which in the scheme of things seems to me to be a very small amount of money. We had a whole number of protests, and within 6 weeks, disabled people got their concessions returned in their entirety. The elderly got half price train travel, but only in South Yorkshire, which made very little difference to very many people. Liverpool and West Midlands are still operating those full concessions that were taken away from us. Greater Manchester did that for some time, and then I think it was a year, 2 years ago, decided to change, and they've moved to a system whereby now there is a £10 card that people can buy, which enables them to travel free on the trains in the Greater Manchester area. And so we're asking, why can't we have that reinstituted in South and West Yorkshire? It seems that the benefits for people would be really great. And there is a real problem, isn't there? That because everything is compartmentalised in different boxes, so the people sat in here will be looking at the finances for the MCA, but not considering about the cost on social care and the cost on hospitals. And it seems to me we need to start having a more generalised view of how saving money in one area actually produces quite large increases elsewhere. So I'm not just asking for the benefit of elderly people. I think it would make an overall saving to the public purse. And finally, can I just finish with one extra bit? I didn't have enough words to put this onto the question that I submitted, but is it really necessary for people my age to be home and tucked up in bed by 11 p.m. with a cup of Horlicks? Surely it's time that we could end the 11 p.m. for the 11 p.m. curfew for the elderly. Thank you.
Thanks, George. You all know that obviously the Freedom Riders were the first group I came and spoke to when I announced my candidacy, and I've said at the time, and I'll say it happily again, that I'm happy to come back and talk to you and have another conversation with you. I want our public transport network to be absolutely fit for purpose, accessible and affordable for everybody. The Combined Authority has previously considered the reinstatement of the free rail travel for elderly concession pass holders, and at that time concluded that it is unaffordable in the current financial climate. We do, however, continue to examine options, including an annual payment, which I know is one of the options that you've just mentioned there and talked to me about when I came to speak to you, to give free rail travel for those concession pass holders. I've been informed we've undertaken some market research, which I know you've just touched on there, and I will ask some questions about internally here once we've had this meeting, to understand the likely increase in demand that such a payment would generate on the railway. The findings of that assessment and the results of that research are going to be brought forward to an MCA meeting, but I will have a conversation internally about that, and perhaps we can have a conversation separately as well. On the question of allowing elderly concession pass holders to travel before 9:30 during weekdays on bus and tram, the restriction of older people's concessions to off-peak times during the working week is specified nationally in the Transport Act. The intention is to avoid excessive demands on public transport during the morning peak, when commuters and school children can be expected to use most of the available capacity. South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority has to purchase older people's free travel from the public transport operating companies, and our funding does not currently cover the additional costs that would be needed. South Yorkshire MCA has many demands on available funds and has to balance the costs and benefits of a variety of possible policies. Whilst there are no current plans to bring forward an earlier start time before 9:30 in the week for elderly concession pass holders, the option remains on our list of available policy options, which is under constant review. And like I say, I will come and have a conversation with you about that. So thank you very much for your question. Cheers, George. Third question, Fran, please. Fran Postlethwaite.
Yes. Thank you, Oliver. My question is quite simple, and I know some of the answers, but I wanted to raise the question so that it's in this forum as well. Can the Mayor please report on progress made on the investigation into franchising of bus services, which was agreed on the 4th of March at a special MCA meeting? And in particular, is there a timetable for when data will be requested from bus operators and a deadline for them to respond with the information? And just in supporting the question, can I say how pleased on behalf of the Better Buses group we are that Oliver agreed to meet with us very shortly, I think within 2 weeks of your election, and we had a very fruitful discussion. And also we were very glad to see that you came out and spoke to us this morning when we had our general gathering. People are quite used to us being outside, I think, at every MCA meeting, and signed a pledge board about the move to franchising. And just to stress, I think the timetable, I know we're constrained by legal situations and so on, but the quicker we can move to some sort of positive change, all for the better. When I met with you a few weeks ago, Oliver, I handed over a dossier of complaints that we'd been sent just from a whole range of different passengers who'd had terrible experiences on the buses. I'm not going to go through those, and I know that they were part of just a fraction of what you've also received as an individual. But just to give people just one inkling of the kind of stories that we're getting as a campaign regularly, and I think this is really important, so I don't know how many people sitting around this table actually use buses regularly and are aware of some of the problems that are out there. I had an email yesterday from somebody who'd been in town in Sheffield on Saturday night and had planned to get the last bus home at 11:15. He turned up at the bus stop for the bus, and there was the electronic display saying it's due at 10 to, it's due at 5 to, it's due at 11 o'clock, it's due at 11:05. At 11:05, a message came up saying the bus service had been cancelled. This is the last bus of the evening. People are put in what is in effect very, very dangerous situation if they're in that situation. Imagine a young woman needing to get home, relying on that bus. How is she going to get home safely? And I think that's a real example of the kind of issues we've got, that a company like First Bus can simply make that decision, whereas under public control, you've got a situation where you could say there may have to be cancellations, but let's make sure that the last bus in every service is an absolute priority for those safety reasons. We can't do that at the moment because it's up to First to decide how to deploy their resources. And I think that's just a really good example of why we need to move as quickly as possible to make the kind of bus service in South Yorkshire that we can be proud of. And I know that is part of your vision as well, Oliver, and we want to continue working with you to make that as much of a reality as quickly as possible, and we welcome the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. You just need to turn it off. Okay, I think it's all right, it's fine. Thanks very much for your question, and also worth putting on record as well, thank you for your time when you did come in, you and Matthew Topham, who I don't think is here, but it was good of you to find the time to come and talk to me and his colleagues. For too long, our communities have had to put up with a declining, underfunded public transport network, and there have been regular cuts to service. I don't think, I'm certainly not in the position of defending those services as they currently are. And that's why in my second week I did focus on public transport and absolutely had that conversation with you, but also took a couple of quite important steps in the franchising process. One of the first formal steps is requesting regional bus operators share 6 years of their patronage, performance and financial data. And we did take that step. This will allow the MCA to get on with the work required to assess the benefits and risks of franchising in South Yorkshire, and we also appointed a bus franchising manager. So those two steps were two of the steps that I know the campaigners were asking for, and I was quite happy to take those in the first 2 weeks in the role. In accordance, a letter was issued to all bus operators in South Yorkshire advising them of South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority's intention to take forward franchising assessment work. We will be able to advise on specific timelines once the external advisors are on board. And as I've already said to you previously, I'm happy to have that conversation with you about timetables, and that will be done in a transparent way. So thank you very much for your question. We'll be in touch. Thank you, Fran. Okay. Fourth and fifth questions are from Nigel Slack, please.
Morning all. Nice nice to see everybody back around the table. I think. We'll find out in about 4 days' time, I suppose, how many go down with COVID. Welcome this opportunity to actually put questions again. As some of the people around this table know, particularly Terry Fox, it's one of my favourite occupations, is to ask questions of people in power. Sometimes I get some good answers, sometimes I don't. The new system that's now up and running in Sheffield with the committee system will prove interesting in terms of questions. Most of mine tend to be cross-cutting, so I'm afraid Terry's not going to get away with it. But there are other elements within the committee system where I'll have to go more often to the town hall. I think it's about time I had my own past. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to the Mayor. In an attempt to ease the Mayor into the realities of public questions, I'm only asking a couple, and they are in terms of clarification on the intent of the Mayoral Priorities report at item 11 on the agenda, and in particular to paragraph 2.6 of that report. My first question therefore involves engaging with communities and stakeholders. Currently, questions like this have to be provided in writing 7 days in advance of the meeting. This usually means just a day or so, possibly a weekend, after the agenda is published. Even well-resourced organisations might struggle to read and digest the reports presented for that meeting, let alone solo activists like myself. I believe this to be detrimental to the general democracy of this organisation. A point of priority that was emphasised during the Mayor's election campaign. Can I therefore propose that the Mayor look into a way questions and petitions are handled with a view to shortening that deadline for submission before a meeting, any meeting? And question 2, the last bullet point in this paragraph, developing our collective thinking on what the region can do to grow its arts, culture and heritage offer. Does this comment presage a return to the commitment given by the previous Mayor to appointing an Arts, Culture and Heritage Commissioner? Thank you.
Thanks very much. And first off, I think you're absolutely right. The turnaround time for public questions to this meeting is really tight. They've been organised in such a way so that we're able to respond to public questions during the meeting, just like this, frankly. We could shorten the deadline for public questions, but then we might not always be able to get an appropriate response to the questions in time for the next meeting, thus leading to a response in writing. So there are trade-offs for both options. And all I would say is I'm really happy to look at any options we can in front of us to be able to kind of make this meeting as accessible as possible. But more broadly, and you know, I think I've shown this already in the month I've been in the job. I'm more than happy to come out and meet with campaigners, organisations, people from across the community, and I did commit in the manifesto, and we'll carry it forward, the idea of having public question time so that people don't need to come to this meeting in order to be able to hold me to account and have those conversations with me. So I'm sure I'll be seeing you at those question times as well. In terms of the answer to question 5 and about culture, creative sector and digital and heritage as well, I mean, I couldn't be more supportive of those sectors in terms of growing our economy and bringing jobs and talent to our region. Our Arts, Culture and Heritage Project Director is currently working on this important and exciting agenda, and I'm looking forward to leading what we call a themed week in a couple of weeks' time, where we'll be particularly focusing on that agenda and those issues surrounding that sector. So look out for some information there. I mean, it's worth saying, I think Kate Brindley's done a brilliant job, and everybody I think is impressed by the work that she has done. I've started discussions with Kate, our project director, and I'm looking at all possible options for maximising existing and developing new opportunities for those sectors. So kind of, I'm afraid it's a bit of a watch this space answer, but you get the thrust of where I'm going with it. So thank you very much for your question. Thank you. Okay, you, as members of the public, you're more than welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting if you'd like to. So we'll carry on if that's okay. Yeah. Oh, is there another question? Sorry, I don't have that on my list. You can just ask it.
So my name's Dr. Mike Thompson. I'll give you the question at the beginning, I'll then give you the introduction, I'll then give you the question at the end again so that it's in your mind when you're replying. The question is, to address the current energy crisis and the longer term climate crisis, we need a massive upswing in renewable energy, which can wean us off fossil fuels and create energy security and independence. Solar and wind are cheapest and the least risky options, well developed and with very few side effects. But central government energy plans are currently mainly focused on continued support for fossil fuels or on high-tech solutions that are expensive and risky, such as nuclear power and so-called blue hydrogen. So the question, what plans does SYMCA have to promote and support the expansion of both wind and solar in the region? So at a recent hustings, our new mayor, and congratulations from Green New Deal South Yorkshire to the new mayor, said it was time to move on from just talking about the climate and ecological emergency and time to start responding to it. There are limits to what the SYMCA can achieve, but there are also benefits in being ambitious. At present, it's difficult to find fully trained solar panel installers in South Yorkshire. This means that at a time of a significant energy crisis for most of the population here, there is a 1 to 2 year delay in requested solar panel installation. Commissioning more training, which is within SYMCA's role, for solar panel installation would improve this and provide local employment in green jobs. Most turbine blades are manufactured abroad at the moment and then transported to the UK. Turbine aerodynamics is complex and the blades need to be precise and long-lasting. It would seem that there is a good match here between what the UK needs, locally produced blades engineered to high standards, and what South Yorkshire should be able to offer, e.g. through support for the AMRC to develop this capacity. And I notice we're generously sponsored or advertising their importance in this room today. My question focuses mainly on ensuring that SYMCA works to ensure faster, safer, both financially and to run, energy generation. It's important that we should avoid the current misguided push towards small nuclear, which has issues over procurement of nuclear, of the material, which won't be in South Yorkshire, but does cause damage to lots of people's lives because of the health implications, over nuclear waste, unproven technology, and financially we note that nuclear has been overpriced deliberately in every recent contract to encourage new generators. At the same time, we should avoid unproven, expensive and carbon-dense blue hydrogen. So installing the fully developed, cheap and efficient solar and wind options in our region is the logical approach. At the same time, we must look at the whole of the energy equation, at insulating houses and at insulating workplaces, which will bring benefits for the long term in reduced costs, and as a retired GP, I'd add it brings benefits in terms of healthier people. The energy crisis is an enormous issue for South Yorkshire. There are, however, people who have capacity, both organisational and in some cases financial, to develop local solar and wind schemes. To achieve completion, however, requires support to, for instance, ensure that the council and school buildings are open for use for solar panels and other organisational barriers are removed. There is a role here for SYMCA in making sure that information and support for these schemes helps them through the blocks in the planning and procurement systems so that they achieve completion, which they haven't been doing very well historically in the area. Extending this slightly, there is the possibility of developing a green South Yorkshire bond, which would provide the financing to allow SYMCA and the local councils to undertake more work to provide a Green New Deal in South Yorkshire and to ensure that there is green and immediately available energy for South Yorkshire. There are some great achievements we can celebrate in South Yorkshire. Sheffield Renewables achieves a lot, but would like to do lots more. And Barnsley has supported renewable energy in its social housing. So there is a framework for us to build on. So, the question again, because you don't have it written down in front of you, to address the current energy crisis and the longer term climate crisis, we need massive upswing in renewable energy which can wean us off fossil fuels and create energy security and independence. Solar and wind are the cheapest and least risky options, well developed and with very few side effects. But central government plans are currently mainly focused on either continued support for fossil fuels or on high-tech solutions. What plans does South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority have to promote and support the expansion of both wind and solar in this region?
Mike, thank you for your question. As though to illustrate the point about the time required for questions, I'm afraid probably what we'll end up doing is writing to you with some more of a sort of structured response. But in summary, what I can say in terms of just my own personal view is, you're right. During the election campaign, I was very clear. We do need to move on to develop a clean energy strategy for South Yorkshire. I was disappointed in the government's clean energy strategy and their focus on longer term solutions and not immediate solutions that we could put in place now. I think there are some great examples of work going on across the city region which we could draw on and try to replicate. There is an opportunity for skills and training to play a part in that mix and to create good jobs in the industries of the future as part of the green industrial revolution and the move to net zero by 2040. And we do have a lead on a lot of those industries here in this region already. You mentioned the Advanced Manufacturing Park, but also in terms of green hydrogen and ITM power. I've talked previously about creating the Gulf of Hydrogen here in South Yorkshire, so we do have huge opportunities that we can look at. It's important that we do that both in terms of costs for consumers, costs for us, in terms of energy security, which we're all very conscious of at this moment in time, air quality, and of course our carbon footprint. So for all those reasons and more, I'm absolutely committed to doing everything we can do. But like I say, we'll have to come back to you with a more detailed response in terms of the actual answer and the question itself, if that's okay. Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, no more questions from the public, is that right? Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Okay, in which case can we please move on to item number 10, which is minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of March 2020. Can I take it that members present are happy that that is an accurate record of the meeting, please? Agreed. Happy, thank you. Okay. Item number 11, progress on mayoral priorities. Dave, could I ask you to introduce the paper, please?
Thank you, Chair. The paper sets out a summary of the Mayor's priorities, obviously developed during the election campaign and now into implementation. We've described in the paper the actions already being taken in support of delivering the Mayor's agenda, and it's fair to say that the Mayor has hit the road running since he arrived in terms of pursuing his agenda, as illustrated in the discussions earlier, both in terms of the organisation responding to the Mayor's requirements, but also the Mayor doubling down in his engagement with communities and communities of interest with respect to taking forward his agenda. The report also sets out a summary of the main areas that will be addressed over the coming weeks and months, and in particular those related to transport, community and stakeholder engagement, net zero, business economy and skills. Some of those areas again illustrated in the questions and the responses the Mayor made to the questions earlier. Obviously happy to take any questions, or indeed if you want to add anything there.
I did, thank you. Just before anybody else might come in with questions, just want to say, firstly, I'm grateful to officers for pulling the paper together and all the work that they've already put into starting work on the delivery of the commitments in that manifesto. And just to put on record the thanks to leaders for their support in developing the manifesto, because I know we can only do that as a shared endeavour and do that together. I'm really proud of the manifesto that we put to voters and ultimately received quite an overwhelming mandate. The ideas that we put forward at the election have the potential to improve the lives of people across the region, and I intend to get on with delivering those commitments that I made to the people of South Yorkshire. Does anybody else have any other comments? Thanks, Terry.
If I can, and welcome to you, Oliver, as an old mayor. It's just the Active Travel Commissioner. Certainly in Sheffield at the moment, whilst we are trying to roll out our active travel, we wanted to take the communities with us rather than just enforcing these kind of low transport neighbourhoods. So on your view of the Commissioner, what's your kind of wider view of what they'll bring to the table for us? Because the one thing everybody talks about is about how we accelerate these projects, and we feel the only way to accelerate it is to take our communities with us.
I mean, just on the substantive point of your question, I couldn't agree more, really. You can only do this with our communities, not to our communities. So completely agree on that point. In terms of the Active Travel Commissioner's role, my understanding from people in the sector, people who work on these projects day in, day out, and people that are active travel enthusiasts and advocates, is that the Active Travel Commissioner, Dame Sarah Story and Pete Zanzatera, did an incredible job at moving those projects forward. So I'm keen to see that we replace that role and bring another Active Travel Commissioner into post. Who they are is another question entirely, and I think there's an argument to be had that it doesn't necessarily have to be a sports person to have that kind of commitment to the role and to be able to get things done. So I'd be really interested in any thoughts you or your teams might have in terms of who that person might be, and frankly anybody who's watching this meeting, the hordes of people online who are watching this meeting, if they'd like to offer any suggestions, I'd be really keen to hear those as well. Thank you, everyone. In which case, can we move on to item number 12, please, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund from Felix and Dave.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund is the government's fund that was promised to replace European funding after Brexit. It's taken a while for this to come through, and finally a 3-year allocation has been announced, but the fund itself is expected to continue for much longer than that. This 3-year allocation gave to South Yorkshire about £46 million, 7 million of which will go to a program called Multiply, which is for adult numeracy. It's a nationally defined program, but South Yorkshire, like other areas, will have to submit an investment plan on what exactly we're going to do for that. The remaining £39 million will go towards precisely 3 investment priorities. These are community and place, local business, and people and skills. The MCA has been designated as the lead authority, and so has a specific role to play here around setting out what should be in the investment plan, which needs to be submitted to government by the early August, between end of July and early August. The MCA has to organise our response on behalf of South Yorkshire and set out the plan, how it intends to manage the funding and the allocation that comes with it for each area, and assess and approve applications. It's also the MCA's role to process any payments, monitor performance on a day-to-day basis, reporting to central government, and to evaluate what the funding has been used towards. This investment plan needs to pick up and set out very clearly the local context, has to set out what outcomes and interventions we intend to spend the money to deliver, and how we're going to deliver that. The interventions are set out very broadly in the government's prospectus, and we have to identify which of these interventions under each of the investment priorities I referred to earlier on we will be directing the funding towards, and the outcomes that we expect from that. The government has shown in its guidance how it arrived at the MCA's allocation, and so it sets out the calculation around which gives an indication how it would have played out if there wasn't an MCA. So in areas where there is no MCA, local authority areas have been given the funding directly. It's obviously the MCA's responsibility to decide how this funding is spent, and with whom, and in what way we will manage this. The paper you've got in front of you sets out the work that has been done up till now in trying to understand this and begin to set out our processes to be able to manage the time, send an investment planning in the time that we've got available, which is very tight. what we're proposing is that the mayor and the MCA chief exec have conversations with each local authority leader and chief exec to arrive at a consensus in terms of how we're going to prioritize or what weighting we're going to put towards each of the investment priorities. This needs to be set out in the investment plan that goes in, but also a notional allocation in terms of the funding that we will attach to each investment priority. This needs to be agreed and be entered into the submission that goes into government. We don't yet know how much flexibility we will have after that in terms of moving funding from one to another. So we need to be very, very careful how we do that from the outset. There's also a big role that the MCA has to play in terms of engagement. There's been a lot of expectation out in the general public, and organizations that have been relying on European funds over the years are now have very high expectations, and we need to engage them and ensure that their views are taken into account in terms of the investment plan and how the funding is allocated and administered afterwards. It's worth noting that the amount of money that has been allocated to South Yorkshire relative to the extent of expectations out there, there is quite a mismatch. So we need to work hard to make sure we can manage the expectations of our partners whilst obviously spending the funding in a way that delivers the maximum outcome for South Yorkshire. There are a number of recommendations in the paper which I'm sure you've looked at already, and I will pause here for any questions that members might have. And hopefully after that, if the recommendations are accepted, then officers will work with the chief execs to deliver. Thank you.
Thanks, Felix. I'm now subbing as chair, just so you know, we've not done a quick swap while you weren't looking. Can I take any comments or questions on the paper? Steve?
Okay, thanks, Chris. I mean, obviously we welcome getting the Share Prosperity Fund to replace the money we've lost from Europe. However, first of all, it's not the level of funding we would have got had we still been in Europe, because we're now below the 75% threshold, and that would have led to major increases in funding for South Yorkshire, which clearly this cannot pick up. Having said that, we've got the money we've got, and each of us have got our allocations to spend around that. It will be a challenge managing that against thematics. So you've got a geographical allocation you're going to have to hit, but then meet the thematic demands. So that's going to be a complexity. I look forward to the chief execs working that one out. If we all want to spend it on one area and not another, but hey ho, it was always there. I think the disappointing thing with SPF at the moment, it's only a 3-year programme. European funding was always 7, where there was a bit of longer term planning where we could sit down and work out what we needed to do. But people will have a view as to why that's 3 year. Maybe we'll find out later today if I've read the news headlines right. But nonetheless, I'm sure we can manage it, and I'm sure we can manage the complexities of geography versus themes, which is always going to be a challenge around all that. I think, however, we must keep the pressure on government to say, government's now telling us this is levelling up money, which is interesting because this wasn't levelling up money, this was to replace European funding, and it's now become levelling up money. When that shift took place, it passed me by, but as did the Towns Fund similarly. So for those of us that didn't get levelling up money, we suddenly found out we've got it overnight. Yeah, it's amazing. But seriously, we need to make sure that these programmes continue beyond the 3 years, because you're not going to level up in 3 years. It's a 20-year strategy is levelling up at least, and that the funding continues to come to those former European recipients that need it, because Share Prosperity Fund is now a nationwide activity. Even places that weren't getting European funding are getting this, and inevitably then that means places like ours have lost out. We haven't got the concentrations we should have got, which is disappointing. So I don't think that the challenge around SPF, not just in terms of the 3 year spend, but longer term, to make sure the areas who have lost out from not having European funding. That challenge has not gone away, and we need to keep on it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, contributions? Not so much levelling up as wobbling sideways is the phrase that springs to mind, Steve. But, so there are the 4 recommendations in the paper. The gist of those, as you hear, is the funding around multiply, and then this piece of work for the Chief Execs to do to balance those conflicting pressures and the need to move quickly. We in agreement on those? Thank you. I think I can hand back to the Mayor.
Thank you. Apologies, thanks very much, Chris. Can we please move on to item number 13, supporting at-risk bus services? Steve Edwards or Tim? Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. Whilst the restrictions introduced to tackle COVID-19 have ended, there is still an ongoing impact on public transport services, with passenger numbers still only at 3/4 of pre-pandemic levels. In spite of an extension of recovery funding through to October, there remain a number of services in South Yorkshire which are commercially unsustainable. This paper seeks approval to utilise 1.9 million of funding from reserves to secure these services until October, pending a sustainability review across local transport services in South Yorkshire. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Steve?
I mean, not so much a question as a comment, I suppose, on the paper. I mean, I think it's important that we do this and we buy the time that we can that's available to us. But just to reiterate what we've said here previously, that this is a time-limited commitment. There is only so much money available, and we cannot continue to pick up the gap in funding from national government. This is a national priority on a scale that we simply cannot meet in the long term locally. So I think it's important we do this. I know it's an important piece of work that the Mayor is leading on, but we do need all parties, the operators, but also central government, to be at the table and committing to having a sustainable bus service for South Yorkshire. Otherwise, all the other things that we talk about, franchising and whatever else, is for the birds. We've got to have buses that are moving people from where they need to be around the region. So I just want to make the point.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to come back on any of that?
Absolutely agree.
Okay, thank you. Ross?
I think Steve's first it.
Yeah, I mean, just to agree with what Chris has said. First of all, agree with the report without a doubt. But people do need to understand at the moment we're facing a cliff edge in October. We've heard this morning from the Freedom Riders and other members of the public how they want a better bus service, as indeed do we all. At the moment, we're looking at exactly the opposite, that it's going to get worse if the government doesn't come up with some substantial funding between now and October. Now, I assume South Yorkshire can't be the only transport authority in this position, so we're going to have to keep the pressure on ministers, or this notion of improving the buses is, as Chris says, it's for the birds. It's going to go the other way around. I know we will do all we can to mitigate the worst effects that might come at the back end of the year, but it is just that you're mitigating worst effect. You're not maintaining current services, and that's going to be a real challenge. So I think there's a challenge for us over the next 6 months to make the public aware how difficult this is, that it isn't just, we can carry on as we are and somehow everything will be all right, and indeed not be all right, get even better further down the track. This is a real challenge now we've got financially in South Yorkshire, and that message needs to be got out there.
Thank you very much. I think the only thing I would say is, in agreement to those main points really there. Firstly, the fact that this is a time-limited option, because we just simply can't pour money into this. But secondly, that the point that Steve makes there about the idea that actually we want to see the bus services improve. Like we want to make them better, and it isn't possible under the current financial arrangements with the government. The government do need to step in, step up, and so a lot of the work that I will be doing over the next few weeks and months will be talking to government about how they may continue to support our transport system and network in South Yorkshire, not just to October, but beyond that as well. There are 3 recommendations in the paper. Oh, sorry, Ross, we indicated so.
Certainly, thank you, Oliver. I think what we've got to stress is we're going to see social exclusion of some of our areas. I know Doncaster is a prime example, being the biggest metropolitan borough, and people being excluded now with
poor bus service or no bus service at all. A reduction is just not acceptable, and we've got to lobby government wholeheartedly, because what we're doing is not levelling up, we're actually driving down our people's ability to get around the whole of South Yorkshire.
Somebody used the phrase a transport desert to me the other day, which felt quite arresting when they said that. There are 3 recommendations in the paper. Approve a policy to prevent near-term reductions, approve the variation of the operational bus services budget by up to 1.9 million, and approve the delegation to the Director of Public Transport in consultation with the Mayor and the Chair of the Board. Is that all okay with everyone? Yeah. Agreed. Thank you. Okay. In which case, on to item number 14, please, the extension to the Zoom Beyond concession from Steve again.
Thank you, Mayor. Members will recall the introduction of a one-year travel concession last year to support extending the benefits of young persons' travel for under 18-year-olds to everyone under the age of 21. Promoted as Zoom Beyond, over 23,000 passes have been issued, with over 1 million journeys having been made. The current scheme is due to end on the 20th of June. This paper seeks approval to extend the scheme and issue the passes to eligible participants of that scheme.
Any questions or comments?
Oh, you should just say, for all the fact that we've done the bad news about the cliff edge, as Steve quite rightly describes it, this is a positive thing that we can do, and I'm pleased that we're able to continue doing it in terms of continuing that access. We know that cost of fares is one of the things that puts people off using buses and drives them into public transport. I think we'd all like to see more of this and going further in an ideal world, but for now this is a thing that we can do and we should do it.
Anyone else? Any comments? I mean, I echo what Chris said, really. 1 million public transport journeys have been made cheaper for young people in South Yorkshire as a result of the Zoom Beyond concession. So I was really pleased that we were able to extend that. One of the most successful policy interventions I think I've known was the My Card in Barnsley, when that was going. And you know, that has to be kind of the dream, doesn't it? But for now, the Zoom Beyond I think is great. So 4 recommendations: approve the policy decision, approve the variation to the budget, approve the production of replacement cards, and delegate the negotiation of revised rates of reimbursement with bus and tram operators to the corporate director. Everyone okay with that? Yeah, great, thank you. In which case, on to item number 15, please, the LEP review from Ruth.
Thank you. The government have undertaken the latest review, and in the Levelling Up White Paper expressed their desire that where there was a mayoral combined authority, LEP boards would be folded into the mayoral combined authority architecture, with different arrangements being made for those LEPs that are not in mayoral combined authority areas. Subsequent guidance has provided a little more detail, but has shown that the governance model operated in South Yorkshire and indeed in West Yorkshire is the preferred model, with private sector close to political decision making. The request is that we submit an integration plan by the end of July. There is a long stop date that's provided for those areas such as the West Midlands, where there are 3 LEPs in a single MCA area and 2P arrangements and financial arrangements have to be agreed and negotiated. The requirement is that the MCA submit the integration plan, but that the plan that we develop and submit meets with LEP approval. A number of things in the timeline in section 5 have already taken place. There's been meetings with the private sector and with members. LEP private sector members are hosting a workshop to look at options for how the private sector voice can be repurposed and brought together under the MCA, and are seeking to have MCA approval that they can write that into an option and present that for members' consideration. There are 3 recommendations in the paper that members accept an option submitted to them via the LEP after the private sector workshop. They consider and agree the timeline and agree any further work that they would like to see coming forward.
Thank you, Ruth. Any questions or comments? No? I think all I'd say is it's really important, obviously, that we maintain that relationship with the private sector, and my understanding is that's always been a very strong part of how the MCA is working. I was obviously at the LEP when it was the precursor to the current model, and we do need to make sure that that strong representation continues. If no one's got any comments or questions, can we please agree the 3 recommendations? Everyone happy? Yep. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ruth. Okay, in which case on to item number 16, please, programme approvals from Gareth.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a periodical report. It provides an update on the passage of schemes through our assurance framework and details of grant awards. The report is requesting 6 approvals, 12 change requests, and the acceptance and disbursement of a new grant award. Of the approvals, 4 relate to transport schemes across Barnsley, Doncaster and Sheffield. There's 1 housing scheme in Doncaster and 1 business support scheme, for which we're asking for an in-principle approval subject to further discussion with partners across the region. I'm happy to take any questions at that point.
Really welcome the programme approvals. We are having a spotlight this week on net zero, so it seems particularly important to highlight the progression of the retrofit scheme, which is a great thing to see. Obviously, need a huge amount more of that, but great to see that we're progressing that to a full business case. And I'm really keen to do as much as we can in terms of retrofit. Otherwise, everyone happy to agree? I won't read them all out. The 10 recommendations. Yeah. Great, thank you very much. And therefore on to agenda item number 17, please, nominations and appointments. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Morning all. This is the annual report that members will have seen before, seeking nominations to the MCA statutory committees, thematic boards and Transport for the North. Our Democratic Services team are working closely with your own teams seeking those nominations, and the appendix attached to the report was a decision when the papers went out. Since then we've now received Rotherham's nominations. So thank you for that, and we'll keep working to get finalise the nominations. Just one point I wanted to raise for members' decision really is on the Audience Standards and Risk Committee. Following an effectiveness review and discussions with the chair and problems we've had in the past about quorum at that meeting, we're seeking to reduce the number of members from 10 to 4. Like I say, it was in consultation with Councillor Lofts from Barnsley, who chairs that committee. So apologies for the sort of late request for this, but it came out of a recent effectiveness review. So members are asked whether they are happy to move to a 4-member proposal, or would they prefer to stick with the 10-member existing proposal. So our recommendations for 4, because say the review and the discussion with Councillor Lofts has recommended that, but it does have an impact on the members from your own authorities. So seek any views or any thoughts on that.
Thank you. Any thoughts or comments? Chris?
Yeah, I'm content to move to 4 on the specific question that Steve raises, Chair. I think we should probably do that as a year's trial to see where we get to. Difficulties, I know, for a number of members across South Yorkshire in accessing those meetings. Moving to 4 sounds like an answer to that, but of course you only need a couple of those to not be able to attend, and you're in a more serious position than you were in the first place. So I think we can give that a go for you and see where we get to from my point of view.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Everyone else? Everyone okay? Okay, in which case I'd just like to say thank you to the work of the people who are on those boards and committees, because without them we'd be in a pickle. So yeah, thank you for all the people that are doing those jobs. Okay, in which case if we're all happy to agree that, move on to agenda item number 18, please, which is the revised financial regulations and contract procedure rules from Gareth.
Thank you, Mayor. This is administrative housekeeping. We're seeking updates to 2 of our core constitutional documents, being the financial regulations and the contract procedure rules. Adoption of the proposals presented in the report will allow us to work to one common rule book across the group, ensuring that we can practically move on the integration process ahead of the formal legislative change. So happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? No. Everyone happy to agree? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. In which case, can we please move on to agenda item number 19, which is the appointment of the Interim Chief Exec Head of Paid Service. Martin's already left us. So Ruth, over to you.
Thank you. This paper is seeking members' approval to appoint Martin Swales as Interim Chief Exec, Head of Paid Service, Combined Authority Returning Officer with effect from the 1st of July 2022. The paper also, in addition to seeking member approval, seeks delegations to myself in conjunction with the other statutory officers to enact the arrangements needed to make this appointment active by the 1st of July.
Any comments or questions? Everybody happy to move forward? Great, in which case it's agreed and can welcome Martin as Interim Chief Exec, and I look forward to working with you even though you're not in the room. Okay. These notes don't keep up. Okay, agenda item number 20 please, which is a Delegated Authority report from Dave.
Thank you, Chair. This is the usual report that comes forward, which is updating members on the actions taken on delegations as a consequence of decisions made by the combined authority and boards at previous meetings. Obviously happy to take any questions on the detail if members have any.
Any questions or comments? No? Everyone happy? Okay, in which case we're happy to agree. Yes. Great, thank you. In which case, that's the end of the meeting, other than any other business? Anyone? No? Okay, in which case the date of the next meeting is Monday the 25th of July, 10 AM here at Broad Street West. Thank you for everybody's participation, and I will see you in July, if not before. Thank you very much.